She mocked me in front of everyone at the dinner table, laughing loud enough to make sure every single guest heard. They thought I would sit there in silence, humiliated. Instead, I stood, handed a folder to the lawyer I'd invited, and watched as he began to read aloud the prenup she had signed years ago. The one that clearly stated if she ever cheated, everything would be mine. She mocked me. The lawyer read the prenup. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment if you want more stories like this. It was one of those evenings meant to look perfect from the outside. The long oak dining table was dressed with silver cutlery, crystal glasses, and plates stacked neatly with roasted chicken, buttered rolls, and bowls of salad. The chandelier above cast a warm glow that gave the illusion of comfort and elegance. Family and friends filled the seats, laughter bouncing off the walls, wine flowing as stories circled from one end of the table to the other. On the surface, it was a gathering meant for joy, for togetherness. Yet beneath that polished surface, I felt the tension pressing like invisible hands against my chest. I had been through these dinners before, where appearances mattered more than truth, where I was expected to smile and nod while Melissa found new ways to parade her cruelty. I sat at the far end, carving at my chicken quietly, pretending to enjoy the chatter around me. My mind wasn't on the food. My eyes scanned the table, landing on her. Melissa was radiant in a crimson dress, her blonde hair falling in loose waves, her glass of wine lifted just so, like she was the star of her own stage play. She laughed with her friends, leaning close to whisper something, glancing in my direction as though I were part of the punchline. I knew the look well. It was the look she wore whenever she wanted to draw blood without a knife. Her voice cut through the air suddenly, sharper than the clink of glasses. "You know," she said, with a smirk tugging at her lips, "Tom has always been the practical one, never the ambitious type, never the risk-taker. But hey, someone had to play it safe, right?" Her words hung there, dripping with derision. A few chuckles followed, nervous and awkward, though some laughed freely, eager to stay in her favor. The sound washed over me, hot and humiliating, though I didn't flinch. I kept my fork steady, lifted another bite, and chewed in silence. Melissa wasn't finished. She leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine, her eyes dancing with delight as if she were testing just how far she could go. I mean, honestly, if it weren't for me, he'd probably still be stuck in that tiny apartment he started out in. It's cute, really, like having a second child to look after. This time the laughter was louder, bolder, encouraged by her smirk. A few heads turned toward me, expecting maybe a blush, a protest, a plea for dignity. But I gave them nothing. My silence was deliberate, measured, the kind of silence that grows heavier the longer it lingers. I could feel the heat of every eye on me. Some pitied me, others mocked me quietly in their minds. Melissa thrived in that moment, her chin raised slightly higher, convinced she had put me in my place in front of everyone who mattered. What she didn't realize was that every cruel word she spoke only steadied my resolve. Every smirk only fueled the calm fire building within me. I let her laughter echo, let her bask in the illusion of control. My heart beat slow and steady as I lifted my glass, took a long sip of water, and placed it carefully back on the table. My face revealed nothing. Inside, I was already preparing for what came next. The sound of her laughter still rang in my ears as the table settled back into its rhythm. Plates clinked, wine poured, and conversations splintered into smaller groups, but the weight of her words lingered in the air. Melissa carried on as if nothing had happened, smiling, charming, steering the attention back to herself. She thrived on it, the way people hung on her stories, the way they let her dictate the mood of the evening. It was the same game she had played for years, and most nights I had been her silent audience. But tonight was different. Tonight, every chuckle and every smirk from across the table was another nail in a coffin she didn't even know was waiting for her. I watched her from across the length of the oak table, the way she gestured dramatically with her wine glass, how she leaned close to whisper something into her friend's ear, setting off another ripple of laughter. She thought she was untouchable, the queen of the evening, with me cast in the role of the jester, too meek to fight back. What none of them noticed was the leather folder resting quietly by my chair, its edges worn from handling, its contents sharp enough to cut through the performance Melissa had so carefully orchestrated. As I sat there, the memories began to creep back in. The late nights she didn't bother to explain, the perfume that wasn't hers lingering on her coat, the strange tone in her voice when she thought she was talking to just a friend. I had stayed quiet through it all, letting her think I was blind, letting her think I was weak. She mistook my silence for submission. She mistook my patience for fear. But I was neither blind nor afraid. I had been waiting for the right moment, and now the right moment was seated at the same table, sipping her wine with smug satisfaction. Richard, one of her cousins, leaned toward me with an awkward smile. "She's just joking, Tom. Don't take it to heart," he said softly, as though to smooth over the sting of Melissa's words. I met his eyes briefly and gave him a small nod. He couldn't see what was coming. None of them could. I didn't need comfort. I didn't need anyone's pity. I was holding something far more powerful than their sympathy. Melissa's laughter returned again when she launched into another story, this one about our first apartment. "You should have seen it," she said, rolling her eyes. "A shoebox with peeling paint. I told him we deserved better, and here we are. But if it were up to him, he'd still be scrubbing those walls with a toothbrush." The table erupted with laughter again, fuller this time, less restrained. Some guests glanced at me nervously, unsure of how much cruelty was too much, but Melissa basked in the attention. She looked at me across the table then, her smile sharp, her eyes glinting with triumph. She thought she had won. I lowered my gaze to my plate, lifted another forkful of food, and chewed slowly, outwardly calm, inwardly counting every beat of her arrogance. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to flinch, to argue, to defend myself in front of her audience. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. My silence was a mirror she refused to look into, and with every second that passed, my calmness grew heavier, more deliberate. The conversations swirled around me, but I was already moving beyond them, already hearing the words I knew were written in the document beside me. I remembered the day she had signed it, her laughter echoing even then, dismissing it as just a formality. She had been so certain she'd never need to worry about it, so confident in her ability to control every outcome. But paper has a way of outlasting lies, and signatures don't fade just because the truth is inconvenient. I lifted my glass again, this time not for water but for the wine that had been poured in front of me. I let the taste linger, bitter but warm, as I studied her once more. She was still smiling, still holding court like a queen. I let her sit in that illusion a little longer. I let her think she had me exactly where she wanted me. Quiet, diminished, the safe target of her jokes. But inside, I was no longer the man she thought she knew. I was no longer the one who swallowed the humiliation and let it rot in silence. I was the man with the folder, the man who had planned for this moment, the man she had underestimated for too long. As the laughter rippled around the table once more, I straightened in my chair, resting one hand lightly on the folder by my side. My heart slowed, my breathing even, the calm before the storm. Every detail of the room sharpened, the glint of the chandelier on the crystal glasses, the sound of forks tapping against plates, the faint perfume of roses on the table centerpiece. It was all background now, a stage set for the moment I had been waiting for. Melissa leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine, her laughter fading into a smug little smile. She didn't know it yet, but the stage she loved so much was about to collapse beneath her. And when it did, she wouldn't be the star of the evening anymore. She would be the lesson. The dinner carried on like a play that had gone on too long, every guest playing their part without realizing the curtain was about to fall. Melissa raised her glass again, toasting herself more than anyone else, basking in the glow of attention. "To building a life the right way," she declared, her eyes flicking toward me as if daring me to object. The room laughed and clinked their glasses. I lifted mine, too, not in celebration, but in anticipation. The air felt thicker now, every word from her mouth tightening the coil inside me, pulling it taut until I could almost hear it hum. I didn't rush it. I let her speak, Let her believe she was the only one commanding the room. I studied her as she leaned forward to tell yet another story, the red of her dress catching the light, the confidence in her posture so absolute that no one could imagine it wavering. She was a master of this theater, and everyone there was an audience she had charmed for years. I had been the prop, the straight man to her sharp wit, the one who smiled through the sting. But tonight, the roles had shifted. Tonight, I wasn't the audience, I wasn't the prop. I was the stagehand pulling the lever that would drop the trapdoor beneath her. The lawyer sat quietly a few seats away, blending in almost too well with the other guests. He was dressed simply, a dark suit, a calm demeanor, sipping his water without drawing any notice. I had asked him to come under the guise of an old friend, and Melissa hadn't questioned it. She rarely paid attention to the people she didn't think mattered. To her, he was invisible, which made him perfect. As the main course dwindled and dessert plates were set down, Melissa's laughter reached its peak. She leaned back in her chair, satisfied, triumphant, owning the evening in her own mind. That was when I pushed my chair back slowly, the scrape of wood against the floor cutting through the chatter like a blade. The room stilled, heads turned, forks paused mid-air. Melissa's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. She wasn't used to me moving in moments like this. She expected me to stay seated, to stay small. Without a word, I reached down and lifted the leather folder from beside me. My hand was steady as I placed it on the table in front of me. The dull thud of its weight against the wood seemed louder than the laughter had been moments earlier. Melissa tilted her head, her smile faltering. "What's this?" she asked, her tone sharp, uncertain. I didn't answer her. I didn't look at her. Instead, I slid the folder across the table to the lawyer. He opened it with practiced precision, pulling out the neatly stacked pages, the ink of signatures still bold despite the years. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began to read aloud. The sound of his voice was calm, professional, deliberate, cutting through the silence that had gripped the room. This prenuptial agreement, signed by both parties, states clearly and without ambiguity that in the event of infidelity, all marital assets, including but not limited to property, accounts, and investments, shall revert solely to the husband. The words hung in the air like a gavel strike. Melissa's smile vanished entirely, her face draining of color. Her hand, which had been poised elegantly on the stem of her wine glass, froze mid-motion. Around the table, the guests shifted uncomfortably, their expressions a mix of confusion, shock, and disbelief. The lawyer continued, his voice steady, unyielding, each clause a blow Melissa hadn't seen coming. She tried to laugh, but the sound caught in her throat, brittle and hollow. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice shaking. "You can't just—" But the lawyer kept reading, ignoring her protest, his words relentless. Every detail was there, every condition she had dismissed years ago when she signed it with a careless flourish, convinced she would never be the one to break the vows. She had laughed then, too. But she wasn't laughing now. Her eyes darted toward me, wide, desperate, searching for some sign that I was bluffing. But I remained silent, my face calm, my posture steady. I didn't need to say a word. The contract was speaking for me, louder than any accusation could. She opened her mouth again, but no words came. She closed it slowly, her jaw trembling, her breath shallow. The lawyer's voice filled the room, echoing off the walls. Every sentence another stone in the wall closing around her. The guests sat frozen, their utensils abandoned, their wine glasses untouched. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire dinner had been paused, the spotlight now fixed solely on Melissa as her performance unraveled. When the lawyer finished, he placed the pages neatly back into the folder and slid it across the table once more. The silence that followed was deafening. Melissa's face was pale, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. Her eyes flicked from the folder to me, pleading silently, but I gave her nothing. I stood slowly, pushing my chair back with deliberate calm. The sound was final, like the closing of a door. The guests watched me, their faces filled with shock, some even with awe. Melissa's lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Her silence was louder than her laughter had ever been. And I turned, walking away from the table, leaving her frozen in the spotlight she had created for herself. The silence after the lawyer's voice faded was heavy enough to choke on. Melissa sat rigid in her chair, her crimson dress now seeming like a costume that didn't fit. Her face, once flushed with the triumph of holding court at the dinner table, was ghostly pale. Her lips moved as if she were searching for words, but none came. The guests, still frozen, shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between her and me, waiting for someone to break the unbearable quiet. I didn't move quickly. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of the truth press down on her shoulders until she felt its full force. Finally, she tried to speak, her voice cracking. "This doesn't mean anything. It's old. It's just paper. You wouldn't dare enforce it." But her words lacked conviction, brittle and empty. She looked at her friends, her parents, anyone who might throw her a lifeline. But all she saw were stunned faces, some filled with pity, others with thinly veiled judgment. The lawyer, calm and impassive, closed the folder and slid it back toward me. His role was complete. Melissa slammed her hand on the table suddenly, rattling the glasses and startling a few guests. "This is humiliating," she snapped, her voice shrill. "You planned this, didn't you? You brought him here to embarrass me, to make me look like some kind of villain in front of everyone." Her eyes were wild now, darting between me and the people still staring at her. She wanted anger from me, wanted me to argue, to shout, to give her the chance to twist the story. But I gave her nothing. My silence was colder than any rage could have been. Her mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, finally whispering, "Melissa." But the single word carried no defense, only shame. Her father shook his head slowly, his jaw clenched, as if he had suspected more than he ever said. The guests at the far end of the table lowered their eyes, avoiding her desperate gaze. She was alone now, exposed under the chandelier's warm light, and all the power she thought she had vanished like smoke. I picked up the folder, tucking it neatly under my arm. I didn't hurry, didn't look at her. I simply moved with steady, deliberate calm. My chair scraped softly against the floor as I pushed it back, the sound final, like a gavel striking wood. Melissa rose halfway from her seat, her hands trembling. "Tom, wait. Please, let's talk about this. Don't do this in front of them. Don't walk away like this." Her voice broke on the last word, a desperate plea wrapped in fear. I stopped at the edge of the table and turned just enough to meet her eyes. For years, she had mocked me, belittled me, treated me like a prop in her endless performances. Tonight, I had let her take center stage one last time, only to pull the floor from beneath her feet. In her wide eyes, I saw the realization dawning, the knowledge that every cruel word, every careless betrayal had led to this moment. I didn't need to say anything. The silence was the answer, the punishment, the closure. I walked out of the dining room without a word, the stunned guests parting in silence to let me pass. Behind me, I could hear Melissa's chair scrape as she collapsed back into it, her sobs breaking the quiet. The lawyer followed me out, his footsteps measured, professional, leaving behind the wreckage of the performance he had just dismantled. The air in the hallway was cooler, freer, as if I had stepped out of a cage I had lived in for far too long. Outside, the night was calm. The moon cast a pale glow across the driveway, and the sound of crickets filled the air. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the stillness, letting the tension of years wash away. Inside that house, Melissa was left to face the fallout of her arrogance, the stares of her friends, the disappointment of her parents. She had mocked me at dinner, certain I would remain silent, but she had forgotten the contract she signed, the truth inked in black and white. She had forgotten that silence doesn't always mean weakness. As I walked toward my car, the folder tucked securely under my arm, I felt no anger, no satisfaction, only clarity. Melissa had built her world on control and appearances, and with one reading of a prenup, that world had collapsed. The guests would remember the moment she froze, the color draining from her face, the mask slipping at last. And she would remember that it wasn't my words that destroyed her. It was her own choices, her own signature, her own betrayal. I opened the car door, slid into the driver's seat, and looked once more at the glowing windows of the house. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free of her stage, her mockery, her endless games. The silence I had carried for so long had become the loudest voice in the room, and it had spoken for me with undeniable finality. And in that moment, I understood. Sometimes silence is louder than any scream, and the calmest man at the table is the one who holds all the power. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment if you want more stories like this.